John Golding writes, "If Le Bonheur de Vivre is one of the landmarks in the history of art, the Les Demoiselles d'Avignon changed its very course. It remains the most significant single 20th century painting." Matisse created its signature work between 1905 and 1906 and released it to astonishment and great critical acclaim. He was already well known as an artistic leader, and Picasso had been introduced to him by the Steins in 1905. Picasso knew that if he was to move to the forefront of Parisian art, he had to outdo Matisse. We can see in the side-by-side image Picasso reworking Matisse's figure as a more forthright and challenging human presence. He makes much of his visit to the Trocadero, with its collection of primitive artifacts. "If you give spirits a shape, you break free from them," he said, recollecting that visit. "I grasped why I was a painter, all alone in that museum, surrounded by masks, red Indian dolls, dummies covered with dust. The Demoiselle must have come that day, because it was my first exorcising picture." No doubt the African masks were important and visceral and memorable influences, but I believe more subtle visual memories were also at work. It may seem odd to doubt the word of the artist in discussing his own creation, but an artist absorbs an enormous amount of information that the mind organizes unconsciously to create a library that can be called on when needed. For example, let's compare the Demoiselle and Cézanne's later large bathers, which notably was first exhibited in 1906, the year before Picasso created his own masterwork. The strange mask-like face in the bathers is very similar in proportion to Picasso's radical African mask face. If we flip the Cézanne, it seems eerily similar, though less carved than Picasso's version. There is, however, another painting, created 37 years earlier, that is much more fundamental an influence, and appears to have been overlooked as such. It is not a work of art hidden in a dusty drawer or secreted in a private collection, but a work of art in display in one of the world's foremost collections of European art. The Barnes collection houses many Cézanne paintings, amongst which is a small study, Les Courtisans, painted in 1870. I imagine as you see them side by side, you are struck, as was I, by the similarity between this study and the great masterpiece. Before we do a side-by-side analysis, let's revisit the influences already mentioned. Notice that in Cézanne's sketch from 1870, the woman in red has a face with very similar hard-edged colouring and structure to the masked face in the Picasso. The shape may have come from one Cézanne painting, the manner from another, the African mask adding the final character to the pre-existing vocabulary. We can also see that Cézanne's figure in the blue dress seems to preempt both Matisse and Picasso. We can see the possibility of influence, but we need to establish whether Picasso could have seen the sketch in order to have been influenced by it. It was sold to Albert Barnes in 1938 by Ambroise Voillard, who acquired most of Cézanne's oeuvre in 1895. He exhibited Picasso's work in 1901, so the study would certainly have been in Voillard's hands at the time that he was working with Picasso. It is also worth considering the names of the pieces. Picasso originally named his painting Le Bordel d'Avignon. The present name was assigned later by André Salmon in order to avoid scandal. The Prostitutes and the Brothel d'Avignon share the same subject matter. I'm not saying that Picasso was hiding the influence of the sketch. As mentioned, artists create a library of images to draw on and can be quite unaware of images that may lodge discreetly in their minds. For those who are interested in such things, it is a fascinating game to put together the jigsaw of influences that prime an artist for a great leap forward. So let's do some puzzling. The basic geometry of the paintings are the same. The left-hand third is separated by shadow and a warmer chroma. The right-hand third is delineated by the position of the figures. An obvious difference between the paintings are the number of figures portrayed, 4 versus 5, and the lack of a foreground figure in the Picasso. The figure in a blue dress at the front of the Cézanne does not appear in the Picasso, but the form of that figure is closely mimicked by the table and fruit and the blue passage of shapes that climb up vertically until the compositional line turns along the edge of the woman with a yellow dress in the Cézanne and between the figures in the Picasso, and this dynamic separates the right third of both paintings. In the bottom right of both paintings, we have a seated figure of warm hue turned away from us so we can see her back, though her head is turned towards us. In the Picasso, the twist is so radical that it breaks the figurative integrity of the woman, and the mask highlights this decision, though in plastic terms the heads are quite similar in feel and perform the same task within the composition of the painting. Psychologically, Picasso's woman confronts us as alien. Cézanne's seated woman is equally confrontational, though she confronts us with her pain and seems to beseech compassion rather than fear. Cézanne's top figure, the woman in a gold dress, seems to inform 2 of Picasso's women. The one on the right has a yellow-hued body topped with a green and grey head, similar to the Cézanne. But the woman to the left, who is the most erotic figure, partially undressed, appearing recumbent and wide-eyed with anticipation, also has much in common with the gold-dressed figure, whose right arm is in the same position. Her décolletage has a similar erotic frisson, though her expression is more agonized than alluring. Both women seem abandoned to their fate, though in Picasso the woman seems to have some agency. In Cézanne, the woman appears as a hopeless victim of circumstance. In compositional terms, the 2 central women in Damoiselle are doing exactly what the woman in yellow is doing in the Cézanne. They all draw the eye from the top right in a richly broken diagonal to the bottom left. From here, the eye is lured up the left-hand figure vertically until it peaks at the open hand and then descends along a diagonal following the figures back to the seated figure. The stage has also been set to send the eye back around the figure to the center of the painting by either the fruit or the blue dress. From here, one can connect to the compositional rhythm that leads us to the left figure. The figure on the left of both paintings occupies a space separated by a color change and border in the background. Picasso has rotated the figure to face across the painting, but uses a similar change to a grey and cooler palette. They have different arms raised, but share an almost identical triangular breast shape. In the Picasso, she seems to embody the viewer, perhaps the artist. In Cézanne's case, the woman, though structurally occupying a similar role, has a completely different psychological role. The embodiment of the tragedy of the courtesan's life. She may also occupy the role of author, but of an author profoundly disturbed by the brothel, rather than lascivious and excited as Picasso's author seems to be. There are many compositional lines of force in Damoiselle. It is easy to fabricate similarities between the large painting and the small study. However, the overall sympathy between the 2 is quite startling. There are a series of rhythmic compositional lines that follow very similar paths in both paintings. We have already followed some of them, but let us also add a triangle that contains much of the compositional energy and supports the rhythmic diagonals that cut across it. I don't want to overwork the similarities, but it seems impossible to ignore them. And I think recognizing them will increase our understanding of the revolutionary masterwork by Picasso, and his nod to Cézanne, as he said, the father of us all.